So, Ted, how did you and Dave meet?
I think they were looking for a second alto guy for the band going to Yellowstone, and I've signed on for it. And I think David and I really kind of met at Yellowstone. Uh,
Really, that's when we got to know each other.
yeah,
We may have just heard about each other, but we went to different high schools. So
So you say the band going to Yellowstone. It sounds like was there some kind of a program already in place where the SMU band regularly went to Yellowstone?
no, no.
well,
Okay.
a couple of years before we went there, there was a band from Yellowstone that went there
From SMU.
from SMU.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Forget who was playing in that band, but one of the things they asked me to go up there that one year, but I was too young. I think you had to be 20 to go to Yellowstone at that time, so I couldn't go that year. But the following year, then Lee Kildow got up the band, and that's the one we went
I
up.
think they lowered the age to 18 or something.
Was it?
Yeah, because
I don't
I
recall.
think it,
Well, in any case, our first year was 1951.
Okay, so you both went to SMU at that time.
yeah.
Yes.
Dave, where were you from?
Well, I was born in St. Louis, lived there 12 years, and then we moved to Texas. My dad worked for the telephone company, and we lived in Texas. That's where I went to high school, and then to SMU, and until I went into the Army, and then I moved to Oregon.
Okay, so tell me how I guess you were both at SMU, how you both ended up at Yellowstone and how you got to know one another.
We got together when Lee Kildow formed a band to go up that year to Yellowstone. He was connected with somebody, I guess, the year before that said, "Hey, this is a good deal," and he evidently made a connection, and we went. So Carlo Angelo went with us that year. I remember he had just become a drummer. He was a trumpet player turned
That's
drummer.
right.
So why was that appealing?
To go up there? Well, first of all, we didn't think it would be much work. But see, we worked during the day as cabin boys, and then the band at night. But it was just there was a certain amount of romance to it.
Yeah, we heard the girls were pretty too.
And there were 3 girls working there for every male.
Turn this down.
So
So, what was Yellowstone like at that time? Maybe compared to what it's like now. Kind of just
I
describe
think-
the experience of working there, what the park was like.
Well, if you compare it, of course, one notable difference is the bears were quite prominent back in those days. You could drive along the highway and see bears begging for food along the roads, and once in a while we had to make a run out to the garbage dump, and of course there's lots of bears out there. In fact, one of the few times I saw a grizzly bear was there. Nowadays, of course, the bears have been replaced really by bison. And in fact, in the early 1900s, there were only 12 bison in the park, and now there's approximately 5,000. So they have definitely changed since the day we were there.
and when we were there were probably only like 1,200 or so. You didn't see them very often.
No, not at all.
And
So there was that difference, and also the years that we were there, I think they put about 1 million people through the park, and I think the count a few years back was well over 3 million. So the congestion has changed definitely since when we worked there.
So, do you remember your first impressions
first impression of the park.
when you arrived? And
Yes, I arrived with my summer clothes, and I realized how cold it was going to be, and immediately called my parents and told them to ship me some clothes. It was cold, and it would snow up there on the 4th of July.
Yeah.
So we were cold, and when we moved into our cabin, it was kind of a little log cabin, and there were cracks in the wall all around about that thick. So we had to go in there with newspaper and caulk the cracks in the wall so we didn't freeze to death, because we had a little wood stove in there.
I think the first morning I came out, we didn't have running water in the cabins, but there was a spigot out there. I ran out to brush my teeth, turned on the knob, and nothing came out. It was frozen. So we did get adapted to the cooler weather rather quickly then.
So what was the makeup of the people that worked there like?
Oh, we had.
It was definitely a college
Oh
crowd,
yeah, it was all college,
and
with a few older people. You know, we had kids from all over the country. That was one of the interesting parts. So we had kids from the East Coast to West Coast. Florida was prominent there. Ohio, you know, kids from Miami of Ohio were in there.
they drove their Model A's out,
Yeah,
actually.
1929 Model A. And at the end of our first year, Carlo and I had gone out there on a bus, him carrying his bass drum like a huge appendage. And it was the longest trip of my life.
Well, my first experience going up there, I rode up with a friend, Mason Briggs. He was the trumpet player in the band. And we left Dallas in a 39 Dodge. And he and his dad had just overhauled his car. And it was, I think they put new piston rings in and new sleeves. We got between Lander and DuBois, which was 80 miles between the two towns, on an Indian reservation, and the whole motor blew up. And we walked back to an area where it looked like there was some human activity. We ran into a guy. He was a Native American, and he had a gas station up the road a little ways, so he towed us all the way up there. Left our car there. He went back and found us a place to spend the night. And then the next day, he towed us all the way into DuBois, Wyoming. And then I tried to hitchhike from there while Mason stayed to fix his car. And I left there with a couple of soldiers that were stationed at Fort Lewis in Seattle, and their car broke down on the top of the pass. So I ended up hitchhiking with some crazy guy that liked to chance it going around corners, and anyway, that was my first experience in my travel to Yellowstone Park that year.
So how did you guys meet at the park? Is that really how you met?
We met before that.
We got to know each other.
But we really didn't get to know each other well till we got to the park, and we were roommates.
Is that something you decided, or did they assign you?
No, we do. I don't know.
Well, at first they put us all in one big cabin. Remember that?
It was a big
Carmel, and
yeah.
Everybody was in the same cabin, and then we managed to get an individual cabin that we shared.
Right.
So once you were there, what was your daily routine like?
Well, we'd get up and make it to breakfast most mornings, where I bitched about the food and the green eggs, and I was invited to take a trip home. But anyway, we'd get up, we'd do breakfast, we'd go to the linen room. We met our cabin maids, and we would have two maids. We would go from the assigned cabin to the next cabin, and they would change the linens, and we would put wood in the wood hods. We had a thing we pushed along with wood in it, so we'd make sure that, because they all had little wood stoves. And then we would check, since there were no indoor restrooms or bathrooms in these cabins, there were little slop jars that they could use. And we would always hope in the night that they'd gone up to the nearby restroom. Not the case in many cases. We'd have to go inspect the slop jar.
So people who stayed at Yellowstone at that time were given a jar in their cabin? That was,
Right. Not, I guess all the cabins were that way. The hotel didn't. They had the restaurant.
Yeah, there were several tiers of facilities there. We were kind of intermediate, I think.
Right.
There were tourist cabins across the street where they didn't even have bedding. People would have to bring their own bedding and everything. But ours cabins had running water, but no restroom facilities. So we were sort of
We called the slop jars ducks because we were shooting ducks every morning.
incidentally, we one time we observed a couple cooking fish in that one of
They're
those
Oriental
ducks.
couple.
Well, now speaking of that, I notice, you know, when you go right now, the demographic is all over the place as far as the people you see there. Back then, was it the same? Was it more?
There weren't. It was.
Well, probably fewer foreigners. I
Yeah,
would think.
there were not many Asians as there are now. We're up here today. This is probably 25% Asians here. But we very seldom saw African Americans.
Yeah, that's true.
We were always looking for celebrities. We saw.
It's all Kirk Douglas and watching the geyser when he was making the movie Big Sky.
Yeah,
And they actually were making Shane first year we were there,
yeah.
but we didn't. I don't see any of the cast. The cabins, though, that they used in that movie are still in the park here.
I think we went over and saw them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you kind of messed around with the cabins during the day, and you took people to cabins, and then what happened in the evenings?
Of course, that was one of those. That job was pretty good because we were normally through by noon, and then we went fishing in the afternoon. Dave and I were fly fishing fools,
Yeah.
and
So you got the afternoons off, or
yeah, we
Well, when we finished our
cabins.
cabins, and sometimes that wasn't controlled by us. It was controlled by the time the people checked out. So, and some days we'd get off earlier, and other days it might be in towards 2 o'clock or so. And we should mention the fact that the band leader, big time band leader Lee Kildow, he had a porter's job. He didn't have to slop around in the cabins. He actually took guests down to the cabins, wore a uniform, and made money by tips mostly. And after we had been there a while, we sort of graduated to the porter level ourselves.
Second year we were up there, we were porters,
Yes.
and that was the biggest deal there. That was the money makingest deal.
Yeah, it was. But it was more confining. There was less free time.
Right.
Yeah. And we had to be there at a scheduled time, and then we were off at a scheduled time.
but you played at night. Describe what happened musically at night.
Well, we started at 8 o'clock.
9.
Well,
We
just
played
give me
from-
the overview. That they had a band at Yellowstone.
What?
They had a nightly dance band at Yellowstone.
Yeah, we played it, 6 nights a week, wasn't it?
Yeah, 6 nights a week. Our band had 3 saxophones, a trumpet, a trombone, bass, piano, and drums. And the personnel in the band stayed pretty much the same over the 4-year period, except we did lose a guy and here and there. We exchanged bass players, drummers. And I guess the rest of us pretty much were the same each year, weren't we? And we'd start at 9 o'clock and play until 10:30.
So was this like just a nightly? Was it like a nightclub, or was it a promoted dance time where guests would come in and do that?
It was a big hall.
Yeah, it's a big, they call it the recreation hall.
Yeah, the rec hall, and it's now been converted into a basketball court. It's a big court.
Right.
So
Well, another thing we could point out is the fact that prior to the time that the dancing started, the employees would give the guest a show. And that could, any crazy thing could happen during that show. They called the employees savages in those days, and this was called a savage show. And it was a variety of things would go on in those shows.
We all had little acts that we did, and as a group, we and any employee could be a part of the show too.
Anybody that had enough nerve
Yeah.
to stand up in front.
Was it just sort of somebody came up with something and they could be a part of it, or?
Yeah.
We had a couple of routines we'd do repeatedly because the guests were different every night, so you could essentially give the same show every night if we wanted to.
So talk about the music you played.
Mostly standards, you'd
Yeah.
call them, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
In those days, you can go into a music store and buy what we call standard arrangements or stock arrangements. And they would have the parts for enough, I think usually parts for a band up to 12 or 13 pieces.
Right.
And they would be mostly standard songs, you know, kind of
Ballads.
tunes that everybody knew in those days. Things like Blue Skies, or what were some of the other songs?
Moonlight on the Ganges.
Yeah,
Remember that?
Moonlight in Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of those, just the popular tunes of the times is what we played mostly. And every once in a while we'd try to play jazz, such as it was. And I think one of our most interesting, or at least one of the jazz tunes we played the most, was called Tuxedo Junction. Remember that?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's sort of the way the music went in those days.
What about the social life within the employees and the behind the scenes?
We were there 90 days, and we had 90 parties.
So after the band shut down, you would just...
We went straight to River Row, which was a group of about 15 cabins where the male employees lived. The girls all lived in a dormitory. And everybody retired to River Row at night, and maybe one cabin didn't participate in the party every night, but we would have a party in our cabin. We'd have,
well, once in a while, and sometimes we'd cook fish that we caught in the Firehole River or other places. So
Yeah.
we did a little of everything in those cabins, I
And
guess.
how late would these parties go on, or?
Oh, varied, I guess. Midnight, 1 at the latest, really.
yeah, because we had to get up and go to work the next day. But David and I actually had a cabin that had one of the pilings set out in the Firehole River, so the river kind of ran under our cabin that last 2 years. And we would tie flies in our cabin, and we could put them on and go out on our front porch and cast into the Firehole River and see how the fly was doing. We could catch little fish about so big, and we would have stolen butter from the commissary, and we fried them and had saltine crackers and fried rainbows.
Right.
So as far as had you done a lot of fishing before you got there, or did you kind of learn about all of this in the
We
park?
got into it when we got up there.
Yeah.
And how did you learn? Who taught you?
I think we kind of,
Just picked it up on our own. There was a fellow that had been up there the year before we had. I remember
yeah,
and Harold Lutens was his name, and he was quite a fisherman, and I think he kind of got us
Coached
going,
us,
didn't he? Yeah. And then after the first year up there, I met an old man in Dallas that kind of worked with me some and taught me how to finish rods, and tie flies and things like that. So
we were heavy into it.
yeah, we were. It was a big deal in those days.
What were some of the outstanding treks that you remember making while you were there?
I think one of the most memorable little treks we ever made was when we were going up to Mallard Lake.
Oh yes.
We were trudging up the trail because it was about, a 4-mile walk up there.
Yeah, it wasn't too far. Maybe 2
Yeah.
up and 2 back, something
Yeah.
like that.
And we were walking up the trail, and we hear this sounds like a woman's scream. We were, of course, startled. And down the trail comes a deer, a doe. I mean, she's hauling butt. And right behind her is a coyote, just as hard as he could go after her.
Yeah,
And
we had to get off the trail.
We had to
let 'em
get,
go
because they were
by.
going to run over us.
Yeah.
But I remember that day quite well, and I remember fishing down DeLacy Creek, going over to Shoshone when we met a moose and her calf, and we didn't understand the danger we were in at that time. We were sitting there fishing in this DeLacy Creek with this moose. I don't know why she didn't come over and just stomp us, because she had a calf with her. So.
Yeah, we also made a number of trips up to Slough Creek,
Yeah.
which is in the northeast end of the park. And the fishing up there was pretty good. I mean, you could come back with cutthroat trout. You know, they were good size. We did sometimes in the fire hole. We're lucky to get a fish that size, but we'd go up there. But we had to hike in quite a ways. It was about an 8-mile walk in, but the fishing was quite good. You could catch pretty good sized fish on dry flies, and that's why we enjoyed it. Although time we got back, we were fairly tired. But we made several trips up there.
Yeah, we would leave after the band quit playing at night and drive up there. So we'd get there around midnight or so, get off and start walking down the trail in the dark. And we'd walk to a snowshoe cabin,
That's
which
right.
was up there for people who were, actually, I think for rangers who were,
Ranger patrols that come
Right.
through in the wintertime.
so they could get out of the weather. And we would crawl through the window and spend the rest of the night there, get up early and walk the other 4 miles in. And I remember kind of hiding in the weeds, casting so the fish couldn't see us. You could see them laying in the river there.
Well, I told your son about the night you threw your hat at the porcupine too.
What was that again?
Tell him about.
Well, we were walking in the night up there, and this porcupine shows up and kind of hogged the trail. So I threw my hat at him to scare him out of the way, and my hat ended up full of porcupine quills. So I'm glad I didn't, swat him with anything that had any meat on it. So
Sorry. So
Well-
tell me about your private lake.
the private lake, we had a guy that worked in the kitchen that kept coming in with these big rainbows. They were about 2.5 pound rainbows. And told us he caught them in the Firehole River. Well, David and I had fished the Firehole River pretty hard. We knew there weren't any fish that size in it. So we started following him at night. We followed him out and we found his car, but there was nothing there. It was just like walking out here, And so we started off, we left the car, we walked along, and we got to a place where the ground was a little soft and we could hear
Mushy,
water running. And that water was running underground then, so we followed it up. Pretty soon it opened up and there was a little pond of lily pads. We walked around the side of a little part of the mountain and there was this lake. And that's where the guy was fishing. So we hooked him back. We had a life raft, a rubber life raft. So this guy got sent home or something from for probably being drunk,
Yeah, you're probably a cook, wouldn't he?
Yeah,
Or something?
cook
Yeah,
or something
yeah.
there. So David and I go out there with our life raft, and we put it on this lake, and we had this little lure called, what was it?
Orange flatfish.
Flatfish, yeah.
Yeah.
It was about so big, and when it was pulled in the water, it really shook. So we put these flatfish on, stuck our poles over each side, and rode along slowly, and bam, we started catching these 2.5 pounders. Well, what had happened, this lake was not big enough for the fish to breed in. And that what had happened is they'd flown over it with these milk cans full of fish fry, the small fish, and just dumped them because all the fish were the same size, you know. And
Actually, it turned out that lake, I met a ranger a few years later when I was teaching at Oregon State, and he came for a short course in natural history, and I taught a little bit of that course, and I got to talking about him, and it turned out that lake, they did finally give it a name. It was called Gooseneck, and you still can't get to it without a hike now because they blocked that road off. You can't drive the road now.
I know that year we went home with many pounds of frozen fish fillets.
Yeah.
But we never told anybody where the lake was.
So when you think back on it, other than obviously you two, are there any people that kind of come to mind that were memorable characters that?
Oh yeah.
Well,
Manager.
the guys in our band, of course, we were pretty close to them. We actually are still in touch with,
Oh, yeah.
with some of them. And in fact, I think only one, the guy Lyons, passed away. But I still exchange Christmas cards with a lot of the guys that were in the band. And
We had a couple of reunions.
Yes, we have. And there were other people. There was a barber up there that we used to. He was an older man. He and his wife worked up there in the summers. They were from Florida.
Yeah.
Ray was his name, and what was his wife's name?
I don't know. She
Ida.
ended up Ida, but she
Yeah.
ended up managing the place. One
That's
time.
what I heard after we left. But Ray was quite a character, and the barber shop was kind of headquarters for a lot of gossip. And I remember walking in there one day, and there was an old man sitting there, and he says, "The first time I came through Yellowstone was in '6." And he wasn't talking about 2006. So Ray was quite a character. I remember him. And some of the old cooks around there were memorable, but they weren't the kind of people you had fond memories of.
You know, they were all out of L.A. and they were kind of just short of being homeless, I think, sometime. The manager of the lodge was a Norwegian named Oscar Christensen. And he also worked in the winter up there as the winter keeper. And at that time, there was no activity in that area in the winter. They stayed up there to keep the snow off of those roofs so they didn't cave in. And it was a very solitary job, you know. He would cross-country ski into West Yellowstone once or twice a year, which was a 30-mile hike. So,
That sounds extremely dangerous. It sounds very dangerous.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
but he was quite the drinker too. So I mean, I'm sure he stayed pretty well soused while he was up there in the winter.
We had one kid that was up there the first year that stayed the winter too. He says there was about 5 people in the area in the winter. He said there wasn't a card game he didn't know by the time that winter was over. And he tried to ski into west and actually had to call the rangers to come and meet him halfway. He had to thaw his feet out in the Firehole River down around Madison Junction, I think. But nowadays, I guess with the snowmobiles, there must be a lot of people come through in the winter.
Well, they've got a hotel that's open all winter there
Yeah.
called the Snow Lodge now, and these winter tours that come in stay there. So yeah, there's a lot of winter activity there now. But Oscar was memorable to me because he was kind of a rough character.
Yeah. He got along surprisingly well with college kids, actually.
Yeah. I remember I came out of the bar one night, drunk as a skunk. And he met me coming across the lobby because I was headed down to play. He met me and he said, "I want you to come to my office in the morning, 8 o'clock, but don't go to the recreation hall tonight." So they played without me that night. But the next morning I went to his office and his total comment to me was, Winberg, I want you to get on the ball or get on the bus. So I remember Oscar with, yeah, he was really a good guy.
Well, another thing we did that was kind of sort of special to kind of break the routine around there is every once in a while a group of us would go into West Yellowstone. And we used to have our some pretty good times, get a good meal, go to some fancy bar in there, but it was always a little dicey trying to drive back to Old Faithful after a night at West Yellowstone.
If you remember the trip we were on yesterday that snaked through the canyon, that was the main road to West Yellowstone, and we'd be in there probably imbibing more than we should have, and try to drive from West Yellowstone to Old Faithful in 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. It's 30 miles in 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm. It was popular once you found a girlfriend up there to take your girlfriend into West for a special evening.
Yes, and we had a movie theater there that had
that's
folding
right.
chairs in it.
Yeah, that's right. I had forgotten about that.
So if I was to walk through the parking lot in those days, what might I have seen parked out there?
And you're talking about at the lodge?
Yeah, what were the big cars in those days? I mean, the big cars that you guys were able to afford.
Well, everything, there was really plush. The big Cadillacs had big fins, but there were no RVs.
Well, I drove a 49 Frazier up there one year.
Yeah, I went up there with him.
It was like a tank, but it got me there and back. So,
I drove up there 2 years in a 41 Ford coupe, and it was hot stuff.
Yeah.
Now, what about the Tetons down here? Were you familiar with this mountain range before you went up to Yellowstone, or did you find out about this?
No, I wasn't either.
We just got exposed to it after we got here. Guys were coming down here and climbing in the area, and had a certain romance to it, so we came down, went to climbing schools, that sort of thing, and then went climbing.
Well, one of the things, we got 1 day off a week, and for a long time we'd go fishing, but then as Ted got more interested in mountain climbing, sometimes we'd spend a day mountain climbing, and then the next week we'd go fishing or what have you. But
look,
What, squirrel?
that's squirrel. Oh, I thought at first it might have been a marten.
maybe he'll get in the show here.
I think he's headed your way.
Maybe he wants something to eat. Hey, how you doing, sport?
So obviously when you drive up here and see these mountains, it was incredible, and I can understand why you were impressed with it. But it seems like now when you come up here, really emphasis in your mind is to stay in the Teton area. What?
I don't know. It was an area that just captured me, and I always felt really at ease here, and I came from flatlands,
Well, if you're on a vacation or just visiting, I think it's more relaxing to stay in this area. Although I still have enormous interest in Yellowstone. I would love to come up here if I was a younger man and spend quite a bit of time photographing the hydrothermal activities. I've done some of that, and as you know, I put it in a book, but I would love to explore that more. Nowadays, though, if you want to spend 2 weeks here or something like that, it's so congested in the park itself that it is much more fun to stay down here, I think, don't you?
Right. The park has really gotten a good deal more congested now than when we were here.
Well, both areas have, really. Yeah.
So, this was kind of backwoodsy, easy going down here,
Well, we came home one night on our way back after a season. We stayed at Jenny Lake Lodge, right on the lake there, for $5. We rented a cabin. Now, what is it?
Right, it's around $400 a night.
So there has been some changes along the economic way.
Well, and just in general, was it just a lot more of an affordable experience back then than it is now?
This place was wilder then.
Yeah.
Yeah, you come up here and you would see marmots, and up in the mountains you would see the little picas, the little mountain looked like little rabbits, short-eared rabbits, and they're a lot, you know.
Well, one thing, the first time I came to the park wasn't with the band. My dad brought me up here right after the war. And the thing I remember, my first impression, we stayed over at Lake Lodge. And in those days, you could actually go out on fishing bridge, fly fish off that bridge and catch some really large fish. Now fishing bridge is closed. They won't let anybody fish off of it. They should change the name of the darn thing, I think. But so that was one of my early impressions of Yellowstone, was watching those guys fly fish off a fishing bridge.
I'll let these guys come through.
Yeah.